If you ever thought one person can't make a difference, I'm pointing at Jim James now because he got the low note there. And that's just a perfect note, Jim. Thank you. Everybody else was beautiful, but that sold it. You don't always have to be the soprano to get the power or the lead. Someone asked me this morning if today would be as good as last week, and I said, I don't know. Every week that we get together, there is a mystery, a great mystery, O Magnum Mysterium. And sometimes the gods, the spirits, the hearts, the wills conspire beautifully for us all to be present. And sometimes not. And you never know what Sunday you're going to have. You just don't know. The best any of us have is, as the hymn says, one that we'll sing later in the season, bring your heart, knowing that it might well be broken. Today is the Sunday of love, about hearts. And we like to think of them as full hearts, but they're also about broken hearts. Now, I went looking for love in the Christmas story, the biblical version, you see, and if you look really hard, you won't find it. It's just not there. Oh, there are plenty of miracles. There's lots of faith involved. There's lots of hope. There's a fair amount of joy. But there's no love in the story. I mean, you won't see anyone talking about loving or being loved. I mean, you can wedge it in there. You can infer it. But it's not really part of the story. And of course, all the stuff that we leave out of the story, and we do leave a lot of stuff out, not just us, by the way, other good Christian folk too. There are all those begats at the beginning of Matthew. A whole lot of begats. I hope that some love was involved in some of that begatting, but that's not the point, obviously. But there's no miracle in the begats. That's pretty standard stuff. And then there are dreams. Joseph has a pair of dreams, and Mary has a dream, and they're not particularly happy dreams, not to say anything of loving. And then there are other characters we don't mention, like Anne and Joachim and their son John, who becomes John the Baptist in one version. And then in the other version, we always hear about the wise men coming from the east, but we don't hear about how they left to avoid King Herod because King Herod wanted to kill the baby, and he really does. He sends a battalion right after the nativity to come and slaughter the innocents. And we never talk about that part. So I want to let you know that the love part of Advent is not in the nativity story at all. It's not at all present. We can be really merry about it and excited and kind of thrilled at all the magical things. And it's awfully nice, but there's just no love. So where does the love come from? Why do we have it there at all? Not just us, but other more conventionally Christian folks. Well, I hate to admit it, but it comes from places you probably aren't very fond of. I'm skipping over some stuff so I can be done a little earlier. So I'm kind of hoping to get right to the meat of things here. I was going to give you some illustrations, but no, let's go right to the meat of things. Where is the love in the Christmas story? Well, it's not in the Christmas story at all. In fact, it's in a place we don't like to go as religious liberals. I'm going to quote a text now that if there was a text that would make you quiver in this church, you could go, oh, I don't want to hear that. This is the text. So you're warned. Are you ready? You can put your fingers in neener, neener, neener if you need to here. It's from the gospel attributed to John, early in it. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son so that everyone who believes in him might not perish but have eternal life. That's the signature of the evangelical Christian movement. It's what Martin Luther called the gospel in miniature. And I'm quoting that because we get so wound up in the believing part and the second baptism and the being reborn part that we forget that first phrase, for God so loved the world. I pondered that passage a lot this week. I pondered it a whole bunch. And it was only when I looked at it brand new, that I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Being loved is harder than loving. For God so loved, the text says. We emphasize loving, how to be loving, how to do the love part well. We forget that being loved is a natural consequence of loving. Not that if you love someone, they will love you back, but like it or not, someone out there loves each and every one of us. And although we might dispute why they do it, we may think it's a perfectly wretched idea. Each and every one of us is loved by at least one other person. And yet we talk about how we should do the loving. Well, I want to talk about receiving the love. There's a member of this church who reminded me that receiving gifts is as important as giving them. We know it's more blessed to give than receive, but someone still has to get the blessed gift, right? And it's great to love, but someone needs to be loved in return. And I want to talk about why it's important to deal with being loved. One reason, and it's a really key reason, is that we cannot ourselves love another until we have been loved ourselves. It's not a natural emotion. Oh, desire, longing, being connected, that's natural. But love itself, no. We have to learn it from another. And of course, childhood is when we learn about being loved. All this year, of course, Matthew and I are talking about what children and youth and our stages of life teach us about spiritual life. And one of the things that we fail to learn from children, even our own selves as children, is that we need to be okay with being loved by another. That it's natural to receive it from someone like a mother or a father or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle. That this is the cradle of our love when we learn it from another. I'm going to tell you a personal story. It's so personal that I may not do it very well. A very long time ago, 21 years at least, it was Christmas time of 1987, 22 years ago. And I remember it because there were two things that were important. Our eldest was then 3 and living in a crib, you know what I mean, the kind that you put them in at night. He was old enough to live in a bed, but he was still not quite ready. And my spouse was pregnant, and it was a troubled pregnancy. So she was on bed rest. So it was my task that holiday season to do most of the, quote, heavy lifting. The going and buying, the wrapping, the moving, and the putting to bed of the 3-year-old, our son. Now, a few parents in the room, you'll recognize this process. You get ready, you read the story, you have the cup of water, you make sure they don't need to go to the bathroom, and we get into the bed, and of course, the last thing you say is, "I love you." And then one night, in the middle of December, my wife lying in the next room because she was on bed rest, I said, "Good night, Aaron, I love you." And he said, "I love you too, Dad."